Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back, Chappelle. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your Flip Classroom and our continuing discussion of the lead-in to World War II, right? So the big thing about it is right now is we were talking about the financial crisis of the Great Depression and how that's going to lead to a massive influx in political radicalism and the rise of fascist organizations in Western Europe, right? That sounds like something a college professor would talk about. Because it is! So the biggest thing about it, though, in general, is that I want to teach you this stuff really, really well and in a really intense way. But let's not dawdle, and let's pick up right where we left off in class when we were talking about how is it possible that a stock market crash in the United States of America managed to affect the rest of Europe, right? Well, the thing about it is, and by the way, we're going to be moving quick during this whole thing, okay? And I'm going to try, Brooke Chavez, shout out, not to zoom in on pictures too much. Now, the biggest thing about it, though, when we're looking at it, is we're going to see a ripple effect that actually goes through the rest of economics, right? Now, in macroeconomics, when you're actually discussing a ripple effect, it's not called a ripple effect, it's actually referred to as a multiplier, right? So the thing about it, though, is the multiplier, aka ripple effect, of the failure of the stock market inside of the United States of America led to a failure of the Dawes Plan, right? And the Dawes Plan was that thing that we demonstrated in class today, where we were just simply moving America's money around to help Germany, to help pay France and Great Britain, and to help pay us off, right? So the thing about it is that there's an absence of that money that was going around helping pay everybody off. Then the Great Depression is going to ripple through and multiply through the rest of Europe and the rest of the Western world as well. So by 1933, you're going to see a massive influx in unemployment rates throughout all of the Western countries, right? 30% of Germany was unemployed by 1933. 25% in the United States, 22% in the UK. But an interesting thing was the fact that women were actually more likely to keep their jobs during this time period. So now the next thing that I'm about to put on here is an idea that I have, that if I ever decided to go back and get my doctorate and stuff like that, or get my PhD in history, I would really love to write a book, because I have a theory that when masculinity is destroyed, terrible things happen in history, right? And I think that the Great Depression and the rise of fascist organizations is a great example of fractured masculinity leading into totalitarian dictatorial regimes, right? Because you see in 1933 the highest rate of unemployment, and that is also the exact same year that Hitler came to power and had the highest rate of Nazi party enrollment, right? So the thing about it, though, is that this massive unemployment is going to give power to people like these dictators, like Hitler and Mussolini, to come to power and take over their governments, right? Because the Great Depression is going to fuel the rise of these totalitarian dictators. Now, the thing about it is because these men came in and preyed upon people when they were at their weakest state. They showed up in 1933 at the outbreak of the Great Depression, and their names had already become popular. Well, Benito Mussolini had already done it. But Hitler comes in and takes advantage of people in Germany when they were at their lowest, right? Because the thing about it is it's all their tactic. And they had multiple different techniques that they would actually use to take advantage of these people when they were at their very lowest and weakened states, promising to restore their masculinity and restore their statehood and restore their pride and trying to gain more interest in their organizations, right? And so one big thing that you saw, one tactic used by these people, so the next section of this flip is all tactics used by fascist dictators to recruit followers, right? Now, a big one that happened early on, especially with Mussolini, but also with Hitler as well, was they created these things known as paramilitary groups, right? Now, what a paramilitary group is basically it's a militia, right? It's a improvised fake military created by these people where basically like Hitler supplied them with uniforms and guns and things like that, and they were set loose into the streets to actually kind of recreate the military ideals and the military backing that they would have had in World War I. These groups roamed the streets, intimidated politicians, physically assaulted minorities, forced them to drink castor oil, which would cause them to violently throw up and stuff like that, all the while trying to promote the idea that only Germans belong in Germany or only Italians belong in Italy. And they had multiple different groups that did this. The lower level one for the Nazis was actually called the brown shirts, and you can see Hitler actually standing amongst them right there. And then also as well the black shirts, which would later on become known as Hitler's SS, which is going to be the main force that actually uses itself to violently take over the Jewish populations of Germany during the Holocaust, right? Now the black shirts, the brown shirts, the Italian black shirts are these paramilitary groups. And as of 1933, Hitler was commanding the German government, and and his paramilitary groups became even more violent, right? Actually, in 1933, the Reichstag building caught on fire. Hitler blamed it on communists, and he let loose the brown shirts into the streets to attack communists in mass, right? Now, another big thing, speaking of the Reichstag fire, and now, oh, it's the communists that did it. It's not our German people and the fascist organization. A big part of the rise of fascism is creating enemies, right? And giving these paramilitary groups someone to fight against, right? So the Nazis and the Italian fascists turned these paramilitary groups loose into the streets to violently attack communists, Jewish people, and other minorities, right? Now, this coincides dramatically with several big events that start happening in the 1930s. 1933 is a really big year when it comes to the rise of fascist dictatorships especially in Germany, but also all over Europe, right? Now, the first concentration camp would actually be opened in 1933, known as Dachau, right? And it was being used to hold communists, Jewish people, and political agitators, right? And then following shortly after that, in 1935, Hitler begins to create his Holocaust campaign by defining who the German people are. And he creates these things known as the Nuremberg laws, which are the most racist thing you've ever heard of in your entire life and the most anti-Semitic thing that you've ever heard in your entire life. Because these are the laws that define what a German Aryan was, or what a person that was descendant of Aryan race or blood was, right? And he began segregating people away from society, like the Jewish people and also people that he referred to as undesirables, right? And so you could actually see these posters were hung up all over Germany, and it talked about your lineage and how you knew that you were of pure German race and actually not related to the minorities or undesirables that he actually believed in. See, this is all about creating an enemy and giving people someone to hate to try and give them pride in their country, a tactic known as negative integration, right? So the thing about this entire aspect, though, is that literally he used laws and regulation to try and anger his people. And he also used violent action, right? One very famous event is known as Kristallnacht, the 1938, actually aka known as the Night of Broken Glass, right? Night of Broken Glass is literally when a Jewish shop owner, a man owned a Jewish shop, and he was told and commanded under the Nuremberg laws to put a Star of David on his store to let all the German people know not to shop there, right? And so this man was like, no, I'm not going to do that on my business because I need to make money and provide for my family, regardless of what faith I believe in or not. And in this altercation with this black shirt Nazi officer, the man's son that owned the shop came out from the back and shot the Nazi officer. And right after that, the Night of Broken Glass commenced, and the Nazis were turned loose into cities all over Germany where they destroyed synagogues, burned down Jewish homes, burned down Jewish buildings, all the while the police stood there and watched and liked it happening, right? Which is disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. There are actually pictures of Nazis spraying the walls of homes on either side of Jewish ones so the German homes didn't burn while the Jewish one did, right? Because Hitler's goal this entire time was to create what he called his Volksgemeinschaft, right? Which literally means the people's community or a pure German race, because that's a huge element of fascism, is the idea of a master race. And the same thing happened in Italy as well when they created the Italian racial laws, right? Now, another big element of fascism being on the rise in the 1930s is they wanted to reduce the rights of women. Because how better to make a man feel more like a man than forcing their wives into a sedentary and servile role, right? They literally created a system where women were dependent on a man's wages, right? This right here is an advertisement from Italy showing a Italian woman as strictly a mother who supports the next up-and-coming generation of militaristic sons. This right here was a magazine that was approved for during the World War II that women were supposed to read, called Women Wait, right? Women wait while the men work and defend them, right? Creating a servile position for them to make men feel more like men, which is disgusting because remember, women were more likely to keep their jobs when the Great Depression started. Another big thing about it, speaking of, how do you fix the unemployment problem? Restore a man's masculinity by giving them work. Employ them in paramilitary groups and in labor services. Take their gun from them, give them a job. Construction of all kinds actually broke out all over Germany and all over Italy. This right here, for example, is the Hippodrome. It's a massive sports complex that was built under the leadership of Benito Mussolini. Right here is Hitler digging one of the first holes on a major roadway being built, and this right here is the Nazi labor force. Actually, you can see the shovel on their crest, on their shirt, is just like right there, right? Creating basically a militaristic workforce, right? Because giving them a job gives them their manhood, right? So also another thing as well is go after the youth. indoctrinate the youth, right? They actually created youth organizations that would be used to brainwash young boys at very, very young ages to believe in the Nazi Party and the Italian Fascist Party ideals, right? The Hitler Youth was very, very prominent, and during 1930s, as was the Italian youth organizations, right? So going forward as well, there are other methods too, including propaganda. This right here is The Triumph of the Will. It's actually a propaganda film that Hitler put out that was very, very popular. It was made by Leni Riefenstahl. So the thing was, though, is it literally shows Hitler descending out of the clouds, looking almost like a majestic, godlike figure, coming to the Austrians to greet them and stuff like that. It's actually been scrubbed off the internet in a bunch of big ways. I'm kind of really happy about it because it's really, really disgusting film. But the biggest thing about it, though, also, is he also created a radio for all of them to have called the People's Radio, right? Because literally this says in German right here, all of Germany can hear the Führer, and the Führer was his nickname, right? So the thing about it, though, it's it's called the Volksempfänger, which Empfänger is radio, and Volks means people, right? Also, negative propaganda was a big thing as well. They would hold massive book burnings in Nazi Germany, and my favorite book was one of the subjects of many of these book burnings. It's called All Quiet on the Western Front, right? Now, holidays and vacations were promoted also as well to try and make German people feel happy under the fascist regime. He also even created products that would be cheap for them, literally like the Volkswagen. So they could actually afford a car and go on those vacations. They would give medals to people that they went to certain towns, and they even created Nazi exercise campaign programs to try and make people think that, oh, life under this terrible, fascist, disgusting leadership is better than it was before, which is really depressing. All right, so now look. So Stalin, though, is going to take a massively different approach, right? So now, Stalin, though, as we know, is a communist dictator, a.k.a. the Man of Steel. And this is what he actually looked like when he was a young man. The internet really thinks that, young Stalin apparently was an attractive guy. But this is what he looked like when he took over all of Russia, right? Now, he's called the Man of Steel because literally a newspaper article was written about him later on during his career, and literally it called him Joseph the Man of Steel, because his real name's not Joseph Stalin, it's actually Losif Dashgashvili, and he's not even Russian, he's actually from Georgia. Not Georgia the state, Georgia the country. Now, the thing about it, though, is where did he come from? Because I thought that was another right-hand man that was next door to Lenin, right? Well, the thing about it is, he's originally one of Lenin's inner circle, right? This is a picture right here of Stalin, Lenin, and that other guy, Trotsky, right? Remember Leon Trotsky, right? The guy that led the Red Army and led the campaign to recruit the Red Army for Lenin and stuff like that going into the Civil War in Russia. Well, the thing about it is Trotsky was the guy that everybody thought was going to be the next in line to be the Soviet premier after Lenin died. But when Lenin died, actually, Stalin led a massive campaign. By the way, this is Lenin in that glass box. You can go see him in the Kremlin. So the thing about it, though, is Stalin led a massive campaign to isolate and exile Leon Trotsky. Leon Trotsky ends up getting run out of town by Joseph Stalin himself, and later on ends up in Mexico, where Leon Trotsky gets stabbed to death with an ice pick by an assassin that was sent by Joseph Stalin himself. Now, the thing about it under Joseph Stalin, though, is coming off the NEP plan, which is the new economic plan underneath Lenin. Coming off of that plan, he wanted to try and attack two of the biggest shortcomings in the communist-era USSR. And he wanted to try and attack unemployment and food supply, because unemployment was very, very high from 1928 to 1939, and their food supply was low because they were trying to figure out a way to actually run a communist-style government inside of a somewhat capitalist-style world, right? So the food supply plan, these are all a part of his 5-year plan. Go ahead and say that with me, 5-year plan. Stalin's 5-year plan was meant to address these two problems, okay? The food supply problem, though, the idea that he had under Lenin as well, was to collectivize all the agriculture, which basically means to take all private farms away from people and make them into giant state-owned farms, right? And to do this, you have to persecute the people that own them, known as the kulaks, right? Kulaks were literally people that were middle-class farmers, so Lenin and Stalin led a massive campaign to execute them and send them to these places known as the gulags, right? Gulags are Russian labor camps, which are basically the Russian equivalent of the concentration camps used by the Nazis, but they used them on their own people. The problem was that this food supply plan, when they stripped it from the kulaks, by the way, kulak means fist in Russian because they said that they were holding on to all the supplies, right? The thing about it, though, is that this is a massive failure because when they tried to collectivize all the state-owned crop-run crop-run farms, it didn't work, and there was massive crop failures, and it led to a famine in Russia, which means that 8 million people are going to die from starvation. So do you blame Stalin for this? Well, no, of course not, right? Stalin's like, it's not my fault. it's my party members. He actually blamed his own people for the failings of the collectivization of agriculture, and he started erasing them from history. And literally many people that worked alongside of Stalin started being sent to those gulags. Because look at this picture right here. Notice there's Stalin right there in the middle and his assistants right here on either side. And then the next year, this guy's been clipped out. And then the next year, this guy's been clipped out. And then eventually, it's just Stalin standing there by himself. Because during his Great Purge, when he blamed his own guys next to him for the failures of the agricultural system, he actually just had them killed, shot, and executed during his Great Purge. Fun fact, Stalin actually led to the death of more people than Hitler did. So now, look, the unemployment thing is going to be a big thing as well. And what they're going to decide to do is hyper-industrialize under that 5-year plan, right? They actually built up factories all over the place. And so they actually, this one was ironically enough pretty successful. Under the 5-year plan, he would build a huge factory and then build a massive city around it. One good example is Stalingrad had a massive tractor plant there. Magnitogorsk had a steel plant. Ural, the area of Ural, Russia, had coal mines there. And so literally he would build a massive city around these deposits and be like, oh, if you live in the city of Stalingrad, you work at this tractor plant. When you build the cities around the factories to mass employ the workers, production actually increased 150%. And that's why he was known as the man of steel, right? So that's right there is where we're going to wrap everything up. We'll talk about Japan a little bit tomorrow as well. Then we're going to talk about how Hitler is going to start violating the Treaty of Versailles. But I'll see y'all soon.